Hi everyone, my name is Julianna, and today Daniela and I will be speaking about intersectionality and its relation to our field practicum practice here at For a Safer Space. Before we begin, we would just like to do a land acknowledgement, and this will be in relation to Toronto, where X University is located. So Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect.
Our agenda for this presentation will include what is intersectionality, a brief history of intersectionality, social location and identity, what is oppression, what is privilege, examples of intersectionality, barriers in mental health, what can you do, and we will conclude with a review on important points to remember.
So to begin, what is intersectionality in the first place? Many may have never heard this term before, but it is widely used in the social work field as well as many other fields such as law. It is a term used to describe how race, class, gender, and other characteristics interact with one another and overlap. The term was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a law professor, in 1989. Others have also described Crenshaw's understanding of intersectionality as the deep, structural, systemic questions about discrimination and inequality in society. On the right shows you a diagram that explains intersectionality and the different aspects that interconnect with it, such as race, class, nationality, sexual orientation, abilities, and gender. However, it is not just limited to this. There are many more aspects to intersectionality as a whole. To continue, intersectionality has also been used in identity-based politics and has been a source of strength, community, and intellectual development. But the recent embracing of this has been problematic with other dominant areas of social justice. The problem with identity-based politics is that it frequently ignores intra-group differences, and ignoring these differences within groups contributes to tension among groups. In order to fully understand intersectionality, I believe it's important to also have a brief history of the term. So the term was originally coined by Kimberly Crenshaw over 3 decades ago and was used as a legal concept. However, it now represents numerous forms of isms as well as a form of feminism that has been described by Coast in 2019 as puts a label on you and tells you how oppressed you are. It is a theory of victimization developed on the concept of critical race theory, which is a theory that is often used in social work research or other areas of social justice research. Now, while intersectionality represents multiple areas of oppression, only focusing on certain intersections does not mean that one area is more important than another. Crenshaw really wanted this to be kind of a key point in her study, and it's mentioned quite a few times that just because one thing is not mentioned does not mean that an area that is being spoken about is more important than another. She also created the term to help shape the experiences of Black women, but through her work is attempting to demolish racial hierarchies altogether, and I believe intersectionality has done a great job of doing so. However, the work needs to be continued. Finally, we will be going over social location and identity and its relationship to intersectionality. So social location is unique, just as each individual is, and is very telling of one's life experiences and privileges or oppressions. Just like how Costin had mentioned, it puts a label on you and tells you how oppressed you are, but it can also tell you how privileged you are. Social location is also defined as a series of factors that defines a person and their privileges, and these areas can include gender, race, social class, age, ability, religion, and sexuality. So it kind of covers the same areas and factors as intersectionality does as well. And intersectionality and social location intersect to identify how these social locations through which one might be oppressed require a non-additive and non-hierarchical examination according to Lee and Dumbrell 2019. So again, I think it's important when doing research, either in the field or through essays or such, intersectionality and social location should definitely be examined and brought up upon, because without this, there can be biases in regards to privileges as myself, as a white person, or oppressions as another marginalized community may experience.
Next, we will go over a definition of oppression. Oppression is another critical point to the discussion of intersectionality. Prejudice can be defined as biased ideas and beliefs. This can be based on age, gender, race, sexual orientation, or disability, to name a few. An example of prejudice could be opinions about women in the workplace. Next, discrimination is acting on prejudices. An example of discrimination is the wage gap or verbal harassment. Oppression is prejudices and discrimination perpetuated throughout systems in society. Examples of oppression include racial inequality within Canada. Oppression allows for the existence of prejudice and discrimination, which eventually creates a cycle. This is needed to understand barriers that others face in order to work on developing an intersectional lens. From here, we can work to deconstruct how we view systems and individual experiences so that we can better apply the intersectional lens. Next, we will go over a definition of oppression. Oppression is another critical point to the discussion of intersectionality. Prejudice can be defined as biased ideas and beliefs. This can be based on age, gender, race, sexual orientation, or disability, to name a few. An example of prejudice could be opinions about women in the workplace. Next, discrimination is acting on prejudices. An example of discrimination is the wage gap or verbal harassment. Oppression is prejudices and discrimination perpetuated throughout systems in society. Examples of oppression include racial inequality within Canada. Oppression allows for the existence of prejudice and discrimination, which eventually creates a cycle. This is needed to understand barriers that others face in order to work on developing an intersectional lens. From here, we can work to deconstruct how we view systems and individual experiences so that we can better apply the intersectional lens. The image to the right demonstrates the cycle of oppression. Stereotypes are shown to lead to prejudice. Prejudice results in discrimination, which eventually leads to oppression. Oppression then results in internalized oppression before the cycle begins again. This demonstrates how each of these feed into each other, creating a cycle. What is privilege? Now that we have a better understanding of oppression, we also need to understand what privilege is and its role in intersectionality. Privilege provides benefits and power to certain groups within society. When people have privilege, they do so as a result of the oppression of others. Therefore, in order for privilege to exist, oppression must exist as well. Important to the discussion of privilege is the invisibility of privilege. Often those with privilege do not see themselves as having it. This is because without the lived and living experiences of what barriers exist and what disadvantages a lack of privilege provides, it is impossible to see privilege and its impacts. Examples of privilege can be seen everywhere. There is a privilege to education, white privilege, non-disabled privilege, religious privilege, and gender privilege, to name a few. Specific examples of privilege can be not having to be educated on systemic racism and the impacts on day-to-day life and safety, in the case of white privilege. Religious privilege can be seen through having time off for religious holidays. Non-disabled privilege would be not having to worry about accessibility needs being met before going to a particular place. These are only a few examples, but demonstrate how privilege works throughout everyday life. In the case of non-disabled privilege, without these lived experiences, someone will not have to consider whether they will be able to fully access a building. If any of these privileges were new to you, or you did not know they existed, it shows how privileges are so interwoven into how society works, so that they are not noticeable to most people. However, through these privileges, power is maintained, which allows for oppression to be maintained as well. When we deconstruct the existence of privilege, we can better understand how privilege provides us our own advantages. This also allows for a better understanding of intersectionality, as we can see where our oppressions and privileges are, making our own unique experiences. It also allows us to learn about the privileges that are invisible to us so that we can educate ourselves on how others' experiences may differ. Next, we will go through an example of how oppression and barriers can be seen through an intersectional lens and how this impacts an individual's experiences, so that we can better understand how to apply intersectionality. For instance, if a man faces barriers in receiving mental health care due to stigma, this experience can be complicated through systemic racism and classism. Due to systemic racism, it can become more difficult for this man to find help, with the added stressors of finances. This creates barriers from three main points: gender, through bias and stigma about men receiving mental health care, race, and class. However, this example is very simplified, and there are many other factors of social location to consider that can affect this experience of receiving mental health care. Through our simplified example, it is shown how intersectionality creates unique experiences. When we look through this lens, if we were to change one factor of social location, the whole experience for this individual would change. Specifically, if race was not a factor that created an additional barrier, the individual would have a different experience. However, if the individual were queer or a trans man, this experience would change again. As such, we can see how the different aspects of social location complicate the experience so that no experience is ever the same. With this new knowledge on intersectionality, what can you do? First, you can understand your own privilege. There are many ways we experience privilege, whether we realize it or not. Therefore, it becomes critical to think of every aspect of identity to see how it informs our own experiences. Listen to stories in order to educate yourself. When looking through an intersectional lens, there is still no way to understand another person's experiences and interactions with the world. As such, listening to others' narratives is most important. It will help educate you on the barriers you might not have been aware of due to your own privilege. Consider if someone else should be speaking up. Many times, people have intentions to be allies and call others in. However, it can be easy to accidentally speak over others. Therefore, it's best to foreground others' perspectives and narratives when they have lived and living experiences. Choose your words. Much of our language is grounded in microaggressions and can be harmful to various marginalized groups. Consider what you say, and if you say something that's harmful, correct yourself and learn from it. What else can you do? You can call others in who make mistakes so that they can learn. To call someone in, ensure you hold them accountable to their words and actions while showing respect and being kind. Explain how their behavior is harmful to others and explain how they can learn and do better. This will allow for accountability, but by being kind and respectful during these conversations, people will have the opportunity to learn and educate themselves. Important points to remember. We will conclude this video with a quick review of what was discussed in the main takeaways. We discussed what intersectionality is, going over how intersectionality describes how factors such as race, gender, class, among other factors, intersect. We also discussed how all social locations are unique and impact everyone's experiences differently. We further talked about how oppression is maintained through a cycle of prejudice and discrimination, and with the existence of privilege, there is the existence of oppression. We also talked about various actions that can be taken in order to use an intersectional lens and be an ally. Calling in is an important way to hold people accountable for their behavior while also providing the opportunity to learn. In this presentation, we also discussed a brief history of the term intersectionality and an example of how intersectionality can be viewed with barriers in mental health care. This concludes our presentation on intersectionality. Thank you for watching.